Hi, I'm Christopher Golden, author of Snowblind and many other books, and I hope you enjoy our chat.
Good. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Go ahead while you're doing that.
I think I first read one of Chris Golden's books when I was 18, 17, maybe.
Sounds about right.
And he came to Nashua, New Hampshire, where I grew up, and did a signing at Barnes & Noble. I think I had a stack of comic books, like 40 comic books, that he was nice enough to sign all of them for me. And since then, I've just been a fan. So I think he's a great character writer. I think he's very good at being atmospheric and creepy at the same time. So
personally or in the book?
Just in your writing. So hopefully, I'm very excited that you guys were able to come out and hear Chris talk, and hopefully you'll be a fan of him like I am. So thank you.
Thank you. That was very nice. I do have to say though, Ryan, that I want the glasses and the hat so you can actually come up and do a Blues Brothers number.
Yeah. Was it somebody said I look like a funeral director?
There you go. All right. Well, that's apropos, I think. But anyway, most of you know me. Some of you don't. But so I will introduce myself. Well, Ryan just introduced me, but my name, as he said, is Christopher Golden. I grew up in Framingham. My parents are in the back row back there. I've been writing professionally since 1992. I quit my job in New York in 1992 and never looked back. I shouldn't say that I never looked back. I suppose I looked back a lot because there were many times when I was thinking maybe having a full-time job was a better idea than trying to do this for a living. In that time, I've written or co-written over 100 books, some nonfiction, some young adult, middle grade, a lot of them horror, thriller, mystery, fantasy, and there are many more to come. The most recent is a book called Snowblind, which came out in January in hardcover and comes out in paperback right after Thanksgiving, I think. And subsequent to that, my next original novel is called Tin Men, and that will be out in June. I also write from time to time media tie-in projects, which are basically novels that take place in the worlds of existing licensed properties. The most recent of those sort of come out within a couple weeks of the paperback of Snowblind. One of them is an alien novel called River of Pain, which I'll explain if anybody is interested in Alien. It's actually, for those of you who've seen the movie Aliens, River of Pain is actually a prequel to the movie Aliens with Newt and her family and all of that stuff. And the other thing that comes out right around the same time, totally coincidentally, these things tend to happen in batches. You work on 3 things over the course of a year and a half or 2 years, and they all come out the same week. I don't know why that happens, but it does. The other thing is a novel that takes place in the world of the television series Sons of Anarchy. So I feel pretty lucky. I don't know why I'm talking about the media tie-in stuff except to say that those 2 books are coming out, but I feel pretty lucky when I do those things because a lot of the people who do them because they desperately need to make money writing. And I've been really fortunate to be able to, with 1 or 2 exceptions over 20 years, only take and often pursue the specific things that I'm passionate about when it comes to doing those things. It makes no sort of career sense usually to do the media tie-in things, but I always say that the 15-year-old version of me would get furious if I turned down certain things that have come up over the years. At one point I was asked to do a Justice League of America novel, and I realized that I probably would never have the opportunity to write any of those characters again, so it would be foolish of me to say no. In any case, away from that tangent, over the years I've written video games, and I've written screenplays, and I wrote a television pilot which did not get on the air, unfortunately, based on a series of mine called Body of Evidence, which this is one of the books in that series. And I've written tons of comic books, and I've edited anthologies, and I've edited novels by other people, and I love all of it. I love doing all of it. It's been I just said to my friend Sandy, it's been a fantastic way to make a living and a terrible way to make a living all in one. But I feel really fortunate that I've been able to do that for 20 years. So when I do these sorts of things, what I like to do is read a little bit and then sort of talk to you rather than, or talk with you rather than to you. It makes no sense to me, since I have no idea what you folks might be interested in talking about. Some people like to talk about writing and the writing process, and some people like to talk about these sort of media tie-in things, or scripts, or comics, or any of those things. And so it makes more sense for me to engage you rather than just stand up here and ramble on about whatever I'm working on at the moment. So normally at this point I would read a little bit from Snowblind. I suppose I could do that if you two guys would indulge me, or because I think you're the only people in the room other than my parents who've heard me read from that book. Or I was thinking about reading from the beginning of The Strangest Thing I've Ever Sold, which is which is a book that I did with Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, called Father Gaetano's Puppet Catechism. And I'll never forget the day that we sold this, because when we sold this book, I called up Mike and I said, "Mike, it's official, we can sell anything." Which is not true, obviously, but the day that we sold this, it felt true. It felt like we literally could sell pretty much anything, because who is going to buy a book called Father Gaetano's Puppet Catechism? I would have, obviously, but anyway, so I think maybe I'll just tell you what this is about and just read the opening, a few pages of it, if you don't mind. It takes place in Sicily, after the Battle of Sicily in World War II, and it's about the children who were orphaned in that battle, and they go to live at this orphanage, obviously, and there's a new priest, because the elderly priest has retired, and so he's trying to figure out a way to teach them their catechism, and he doesn't really know how to do that under the circumstances, because the children have all suffered such great loss, and they're questioning their faith and their beliefs, and he discovers in the basement of the convent an old puppet theater and a bunch of puppets. So I won't. I'm just going to read the beginning. Nothing spooky or anything. Just the sort of opening, because I like it. The voices of the nuns from the convent of San Domenico rose and fell in a soothing rhythm, like the hush and crash of the waves against the nearby rocky shore. 9-year-old Sebastiano Anzalone thought they sounded like angels. So beautiful were the voices that he found it difficult to imagine they could belong to the black-habited sisters who taught him writing and mathematics every day. Sister Veronica, perhaps. She had kind, sad eyes, and he could imagine her raising her voice in song. But Sister Maria and Sister Lucia were sterner, and had little patience for the boys and girls that the war had left orphaned. Sebastiano did not really blame them. Some of the children behaved like little devils, but he could not abide the curt chidings of the nuns, even when they weren't aimed at him. His worn, battered mathematics book lay open on the small desk in front of him, and he scribbled the answer to a question about how many lira he would have left if he bought a bar of chocolate. It was a strange question, because he hadn't held a bar of chocolate in his hands, nor any lira, since the Allies had taken Sicily from the Axis, killing his mother and father in the process. He missed chocolate, but not as much as he missed his mother and father. Only 3 more questions to go. Sebastiano felt satisfied with his work and almost disappointed that when he finished this assignment, he would have nothing more to do until tomorrow. Nearly all of the boys and many of the girls despised their schoolwork. They would rather be out in the field behind the orphanage kicking a football around, or down at the water's edge watching the fishing boats and warships sail past. Sebastiano didn't like the ships. If he let his gaze linger too long, he would want to know where they were going and begin to wonder why he could not go as well. And there was no point in daydreaming about the kinds of wild adventures his father used to always promise to take him on. There would be no adventures for him. No, unlike the other orphans, Sebastiano was content to sit at his little desk in the room he shared with 3 older boys, and to add and subtract and try to remember what chocolate tasted like. On an afternoon such as this, with the voices of the nuns rising from the church like the songs of angels, and the crashing of the sea, and the lovely smells of Sister Teresa's wildly colorful flower garden drifting through the window, he could almost forget the exploding sky, and the screams, and the tears from July and August, just for a moment. And then the moment would pass and he would remember. Sometimes remembering made him cry. Sebastiano looked at his 3 remaining math problems and frowned. Flipping a page, he saw that there were more, likely meant as tomorrow's assignment, and decided he would do them today. Adding and subtracting kept his mind occupied, and that was good. Lost in his schoolwork, he almost did not notice when the voices of the nuns subsided, but then the momentary silence was broken by the deep, reassuring sound of the church bells, and he knew the Mass had ended. Rising from his chair, he set down his pencil and went to the window to watch the Sisters of San Domenico file out, filled with whatever private grace infused them during the Mass said for them each Saturday morning. The nuns emerged in a peaceful stream of black habits and white wimples, of dangling crosses and rosaries wound about fingers, of kindly smiles to one another and conversations barely above a whisper. Sebastiano blinked in surprise when he noticed a break in the parade of sisters. A man was amongst them, dressed in the cassock and surplice any priest might wear at the altar. Of course, it was no surprise that a priest might be amongst the nuns, for wasn't a priest necessary for any Mass? The surprise and curiosity that raised Sebastiano's eyebrows and made him lean on the windowsill for a better look came from the fact that he and the other children at San Domenico's, newly christened Home for Orphans, had been told that a new priest would soon arrive to take charge, not only of the church, but of the spiritual education of the orphans. Father Colasanti had died of a heart attack more than a month ago, and since then a number of the priests from local towns had shared the duties that a proper pastor would normally have fulfilled. Sebastiano studied this priest, sure that he had never seen the man before. Young, thin, and dark-complexioned, he wore round spectacles that perched on the bridge of his hawk nose. His black hair was neatly combed, but might need to be cut. It was strange. Normally Sebastiano felt afraid of priests, for they seemed for him to carry a dreadful power, and when they looked at him he feared that God could see him through their eyes, and that the Lord would not be happy with what he saw. Sebastiano tried to be a good boy. He wanted to think that if his parents watched him from heaven, they would be proud. Priests often made him want to find somewhere to hide. But this new priest had a nice face. Sebastiano could see even from this distance that he smiled warmly at Sister Teresa as the two walked the path between the church and the orphanage together. The priest seemed comfortable, as if he felt at home. "What do you think, Pagliaccio?" the boy asked. He pulled his gaze from the open window and turned toward the small shelf above his tiny desk, where Pagliaccio lay sprawled on its side, bright red yarn hair dangling over the edge of the shelf along with its arms. Sebastiano frowned and hurried over to rearrange the puppet into a sitting position, arms crossed in its lap. One of them moved you, the boy thought. The boys who shared his room knew that Pagliaccio was his, and they weren't to touch it. Sister Veronica had warned them after the last time, but apparently one of the other boys had ignored the warning. Probably Giovanni. He always seemed determined to do precisely the opposite of what the sister told him. Sebastiano made a tutting noise, fussing with the puppet, but unable to arrange it in a position that satisfied him. He picked up Pagliaccio instead and slipped his hand inside the wool sheath of the puppet's body, animating the arms and the head, making its face turn toward him as if responding to his presence. Sebastiano smiled. "That's better, isn't it?" he said. Pagliaccio nodded, then executed a silent bow. Sister Teresa had helped him with the sewing, but he had painted the clown face onto the puppet by himself. The nose seemed too red to him and maybe too large, but mostly he loved Pagliaccio. Now that he had the puppet in hand, his thoughts went back to the young priest, with his beak of a nose and long skinny arms and legs that added to his bird-like appearance. Sebastiano took the puppet back to the window and bent to peek outside. He was disappointed to see that most of the nuns had already vanished back to whatever duties awaited them, and the priest had also departed. But then he heard a low male voice, and he glanced straight down, just in time to see Sister Veronica escorting the man into the orphanage. "Do you suppose he's just another visiting priest?" Sebastiano asked the puppet. "Or is he the new pastor who is supposed to teach us about God and the Bible?" The boy listened a moment, regarding the puppet earnestly, and then nodded. "Yes, I hope so too. He doesn't seem so stern. It would be nice to have a priest who doesn't make us afraid. Sebastiano thought that if they had a priest who would be kind, who would talk to them, he might not feel so alone. None of the other boys even tried to understand him, and the girls only seemed to be amused by his presence when they could kick or punch him and get away with it. They were girls, which meant they giggled and hid their smiles behind their hands, and he had the feeling that they meant no harm, but still it made him sigh and wish for someone to talk to besides Pagliaccio. Though you are a good listener, he told the puppet, parroting something Sister Veronica had said many times. He liked that thought, that Pagliaccio was a good listener, and it made him think that as sharp as the nuns might be, they might actually be looking after him and the others, worrying for them in the prickly way he now associated with nuns. The other children sometimes teased him because he did not hate the nuns the way most of them seemed to. The thought made his forehead crease in a frown as it occurred to him that the others, boys like Giovanni and Marcello especially, wouldn't like it very much if Sebastiano acted too nice to the priest. The boy held Pagliaccio close, staring out the window at the church and the sea beyond, waves crashing upon the rocks. Some of them are very angry at God, Sebastiano whispered to the puppet. He took their families and their houses like he did mine, but I know he still loves me, that he did not mean to hurt me. The boy gazed at the puppet, worried and hopeful about the new priest at the same time. They're angry at God, but they can't punish him for it. Sometimes they punish me and some of the other kids instead. Pagliaccio stared back at him, but made no reply. That's that. So, what's going on in this book, and I'm going to give away part of it, but not all of it, is that what the young Father Gaetano discovers is that the puppets have a certain magic all their own, and once you use them to perform a puppet show, that night they actually become whatever it was they were in the puppet show, which is fine when he's telling the story of Noah or David and Goliath, but when he tells the story about the fall of Lucifer, that becomes a problem. So that's that book. I should talk a little bit about Snowblind. I also should say, which I didn't say at the outset, I should have, that I'm from Framingham originally. I did say that, didn't I? And I went to Marion High, and a couple of my fellow Marion Mustang alumni are here, which is great. Anyway, Snowblind is set up at Universal Television, potentially for a TV series, but this stuff, who knows? You never know what's going to happen or not happen with these things. And it's a story about a horrible blizzard that blows through a city very much like Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is where I live currently. And horrible things happen, and people vanish in the snow. And 12 years later, there's another storm. And some of the people who went missing may be back, and the things that took them may also be back. And I don't want to give away any more than that. That's what's going on in that. But as I said, I do all kinds of things. Tin Men, the book that I've got coming out in June, is completely different from anything I've ever done before. It's near-future science fiction thriller, which is, I don't know, just a totally different genre for me. In any case, you'll be back. All right. In any case, that's the introductory portion, and I'm hoping that some of you have questions about writing in general, about the process, or books that I've written, or other things that I've worked on. Yes.
Back to your first book.
Yes.
Creepy puppets, clowns. What's it like to write about things that usually are positive or uplifting, and you end up turning them?
Well, first of all, I would say that many people, including my wife, would argue that clowns are incapable of being positive and uplifting. My wife is absolutely petrified of clowns, and I know that she's far from alone in that. But the thing is that the puppets, there are two answers to your question. The first answer is that in this particular story, the puppets aren't evil. It's a story, like many of my stories, it's a story about identity. And so the puppets, the question is, do the puppets have the ability to chart their own course, or are they what we make them? And since it's about Father Gaetano to the puppets is God, so it's about a larger question. as far as what it's like to sort of subvert things that are sweet and fun and make them horrible. And I've worked in all different kinds of genres, although I always say that the horror people are my people. I've written mystery and and every other genre you can name probably. But yeah, the horror people are my people. But that's the fun. There's a glee that is present whenever you're taking something. I did a novella with my friend Jim Moore called Bloodstained Oz. And it's 1933 in Hawley, Kansas, and a tornado comes through, but instead of taking the girl who's in the story, Gail, to Oz, it dumps hundreds of Oz creatures in Kansas during the Dust Bowl, but all of those creatures are vampires. So you have like vampire flying monkeys, and that was a blast because we literally had people say that we completely ruined their memories of, I mean, in a good way, completely ruined their, like, they would never be able to think of the Oz books the same way again. And that's your goal when you're doing something like that. You want to, so it's really fun to take something that is otherwise innocent and make it, That said, and you'll notice already that I tend to tangent. Yes, Jack, I just made that a verb. Thanks. I've always been. I've always had an argument, and recently I actually had this argument on Twitter with somebody. I do believe that as an author, that it's incumbent upon me to at least have some moral center. Some writers don't believe that. They don't think that you have any kind of responsibility to even silently or unnoticeably maintain draw the line between what is, but I'm never going to have, there's a comic book, I shouldn't name this, should I? I shouldn't say specifically specific people or comics. There's a comic book series that's about someone who just basically gives random people the ability to kill whoever they would like to kill. And I think it proceeds from the presumption that people in general don't necessarily have any kind of moral underpinning. And when I say moral, I don't mean religious or spiritual or anything. I just mean basic, fundamental moral underpinning. And I stopped reading that series because it made me super uncomfortable. Because I feel like the author is not presenting the material with any kind of presumption of what is right and wrong. And while I don't think it's an author's place to specifically lay out what is right and wrong in every sense, I do feel like you have to have some kind of core when you're telling these stories. You have to be coming from somewhere. If you're coming from nowhere, then what's the point? Yes?
What did you do for a living before you became a professional writer?
I graduated from college in 1989, and it was a time much like recent times that it was not the simplest thing in the world to get a good job. So it took me a while to find. Hello again, Lily. It took me a while to find a job, but I actually was really lucky. I recently was telling somebody this story about how I feel like I was turned down for 20 jobs I didn't want. I interviewed for a whole bunch of jobs that I definitely did not want, but I needed a job. In fact, I told my son this recently. And then I got a job actually working for the company that owned Billboard magazine and the Hollywood Reporter and American Artist and Musician and Backstage and Amusement Business and a whole bunch of other similar magazines. And it was the greatest job in the world. Within 9 months, I was the licensing manager for the entire corporation worldwide. I was the licensing manager for the entire company, like internationally. I worked on the first 2 years of the Billboard Music Awards. I was out there working on the show.
You left that job?
Yeah, I was working with American Top 40 Radio. It was an amazing job, and I had the best boss in the world. When I explained this to people, I took it for granted at the time, I think, but literally it was a huge corporation, and my boss answered to the president and CEO. And so anytime I needed anything that helped me do my job, I literally had to walk 100 feet down the hallway and just walk into the president's office, and I could get whatever I needed. And I know I could have been happy working in that environment, at least until magazines started to die. And I loved it, loved the job. But then in 1992, I sold my first 2 novels. And my wife had moved down to New York to be with me. And the deal that we had was, as soon as I sold my first novel, we were coming back to Massachusetts. And that was actually fine. It was the perfect time. Anybody who is a grown-up and has a grown-up job and a grown-up has a family, a spouse and kids and stuff like that, it is incredibly hard and incredibly brave to quit a job and try to write full time. In fact, I think in the current environment, I would almost say it's insane to do that if you have people who rely on you. I was, at the time, fortunately, I was married, but we had no kids, no reason that we had to sort of stay where we were. So, and in fact, my brother, who's in the back of the room, our aunt came up to him at our family Christmas party and said, tell me what really happened.
Yeah, right.
Because she was absolutely sure that I'd been fired, certain that I'd been fired.
You did it for a girl.
Yeah. No, but I mean, this is what I wanted. I mean, what I wanted was always to do that. Literally the job in New York and college, in a way, what I chose to do for college was only a means to an end for me. I wanted to get the best education that I could get and get the best job I could get doing something that I really enjoyed, just in case what I really wanted to do never happened. And that's the advice I give people all the time, young people all the time. Pursue a thing you can love, so that even if you only get 10% of your dream, you still can have a life that you can love and enjoy. And I talk to school kids all the time, and the sort of net of the talk that I give to those kids is the number one reason to study and work hard and do better in school is because long term, and this is the short version of it, but long term, it gives you the freedom to choose, to have greater opportunities to choose something that will make you happy, so that you don't end up boxed in by not doing the work now, not presenting yourself better, or being able to write better or speak better now. So. I don't remember the question, but yes, sir.
What's
You
your
answered it.
writing regimen? What keeps your productivity going? How do you do that? And how do you get your creativity at its top?
Well, there are a bunch of different elements. So I'm going to sort of work backwards. I'm very fortunate in that creativity or imagination has never been a problem for me. I've never had to sit and, sometimes I'll have an assignment, I have to come up with an idea for something, but I have lots of ideas. I have files of ideas. I have, outlines that I've written that haven't been sold yet, but eventually I hope will be sold. So it isn't necessarily ever a problem for me to come up with something. But that's on the sort of creative end, the inspiration end. And I think you can force an idea. You can find, I love folklore, so I do a lot of reading in, legends and mythology, and come up with crazy things that, I love this stuff, but I've never run across this particular weird thing from, Bavarian folk tales before, and hey, let me use that in a story. So I can sort of search for inspiration if I need to, and a lot of times it's sort of like a lock where somebody who's trying to crack a safe. You're listening for the click. So you have 2 of the numbers and you're trying to figure out what that third number is. So I'll have a piece here and a piece there, and they'll sit there for 2 years. And I'll run across something and I'll go, oh wait, if I take this piece and put it over here with these pieces, then that will make the story that I didn't know that I meant to tell, but it is the story that I meant to tell. Sometimes it happens while I'm writing the book, that I'll stumble across. In fact, very often, halfway through something, I'll say, oh, this is what I've been writing about the whole time, and I didn't even know it. In fact, I would venture to say if I listed the books in which that's happened, they're the best ones, in my opinion. As far as work regimen is concerned, I usually do at least some work, at least 6, if not 7 days a week. Things spill over into Saturday and Sunday and it is what it is. But the 5 days a week are, I treat writing like a regular job. I'm getting worse at getting to my desk early, the older I get, but I'm usually at my desk by 9, and at that point, the other thing that's happened over time is that I have so many different kinds of projects going, so many different things that I'm working on at any given time, that these days my mornings are generally taken up with all the minutia. It's emails and projects and phone calls and a variety of things. And right now, physical therapy for my shoulder, which is not killing me right now, but so whatever is also taking up my day. And then I tend to get most of my writing done between 2 and 6 in the afternoon. In that 4-hour period. I used to, when I was younger and could really focus more on it, I used to be able to write sometimes from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., depending on what the project was. But I usually try to get, over the course of a day, depending if I've gotten any writing done in the morning or not, if I have or haven't, I may write between 2,000 and 3,000 words a day. Once upon a time, I could do at least 4,000, 5,000 sometimes, but that was a long time ago. In fact, I get teased a lot about being able to write a lot, but I have writer friends who write way more than that. In fact, 2,000 words a day. If you're writing full time, 2,000 words a day, I think, is the bare minimum that you should be able to produce. And some days it's hard to even get that. So, but I'm working on it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this kind of actually ties into that. You work on so many different projects.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I read Baltimore, the comic books and novels. Do you work on things simultaneously, or do you just kind of like doggedly go after the one thing you're on?
When things are working out the way they should, I try to work on. Because I write a regular comic book series called Baltimore for Dark Horse Comics, actually based on this novel, or spin-off from that novel. And so usually I'm writing a novel and keeping up with my comics deadlines and probably editing an anthology all at the same time. But they're really 3 different things. So it's not difficult or it's time consuming, but it isn't challenging in the sense that it takes my focus. You know what I mean? They're such different things that I'm not thrown off by it. The trouble comes, as in the past, sometimes I've actually worked on more than one novel at a time, or I've collaborated with somebody. I just collaborated with a friend of mine named Tim Leben on a short story, and even that was harder than it used to be, because I'm trying to write this novel, and I'll work on the novel for 3 days, and then here comes Tim's latest version of the story, and I've got to stop the novel and write 1,000, 1,500 words on this short story. That's getting difficult. If I'm doing something like that, it's all these things used to be much easier than they are, than they're getting anyway. Questions? Yes, Vanessa.
So the best kind of writing is super honest to whatever the character is or whatever the situation is, right? And with horror in particular, you could sort of think about, I wonder what would happen if my mom or my dad read this and said, where did that come from in your head, right? So have you gotten to the point where you don't even think about that stuff anymore?
You've read my first novel.
Yes.
Do you think that I was that concerned about what my parents might think when I was writing that?
I know what you ultimately put on the page, but I don't know if it was hard for you.
Listen, I have to say, so my first novel, for those of you who haven't read it, and I've got to watch my delivery here, my first novel is loaded with all kinds of things that I probably wouldn't even write today. And the first draft of it was way more explicit.
It's a great novel.
Thank you. It's called Of Saints and Shadows, and we just celebrated.
I recommend it all the time.
We just celebrated the 20th anniversary of Saints and Shadows in June, so it was very exciting. But that novel was actually read by the nuns who taught me in 7th and 8th grade, and they loved it.
Wow.
I was horrified when they told me they were reading it. I was definitely not comfortable with the fact that they had read it at all. But the thing is, for me at least, that was way less comfortable. Growing up, I've put all kinds of things in books and stories, and I've never once been worried that my mom would judge me for what I put in my stories. My mom was always super encouraging when I was a kid, and I'll always remember that I had this magnet she bought me that said, "Believe in yourself and dare to live your dreams." And my house has all kinds of stuff like that around it now. And the weird thing is, like, for most people, it's a tchotchke. You know what I mean? It's not like it's something you buy and it's like, oh, that's a cute thing. It's inspirational, and we'll throw that up and whatever. But it stuck with me, and it meant something to me. And so I was never worried about what my mom would say about the content. The only thing that she does do all the time is, who's this about? That's like, she always tries to interpret. I know who you're writing about here. And I'm like, I'm writing about fictional characters that you don't know. But beyond that, I was never worried about a judgment, because I always knew that she understood that this was the stuff that I was always passionate about. This was the stuff that I always loved. And that there was never any question about that. I was definitely more concerned about the nuns and my, like, super old world Sicilian father-in-law who read that book before I married his daughter. and when he was reading it, all I could think was like, oh my God, like, if I could go back right now, I would edit so much stuff out of this book. Fortunately, I don't think he paid that much attention to it, because it had too many names. He doesn't like books with too many names. He mostly reads romance novels. He's 87 years old and reads romance novels. Nothing against them. It's just an odd, Anyway, so, yeah. But I love the weird stuff. And I've always been, the other thing my mom hates when I tell this story, because I tell it pretty much every time I do one of these, is that when I was a kid, when I was starting to write stories, my mother said, "Why can't you write something good?" And what she meant was, "Why can't you write something nice?" And I said, but I've written Western stories and science fiction stories and suspense stories and all this stuff, but somebody always dies. But I loved the crazy stuff and the weird stuff, and it's still my passion. And I have to say, my daughter is such an enigma. She's 12, and she's 5'6.5" at the age of 12, and she's a kind of a jock, and she's very much now into clothes and all of this stuff. She's all getting into being sort of girly in that way, on the one hand, and on the other hand, at home, where her friends don't see, she's a total nerd. She's like Doctor Who and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all of this stuff. So I love that. I love that that's the case. And she has like Doctor Who stuff on the walls in her, in her bedroom and stuff like that. And her friends come in and they're like, "What is that?" And she's like, "It's Doctor Who." And then if they want an elaboration, she's like, "Never mind. Forget it." Yes.
What authors do you admire the most, or like to that inspire you, or? And what is it about their writing you like the most?
That's a perfect question. I'm hoping to. This is another tangent. There's the day after Black Friday. Most of you probably know is what they call Small Business Saturday, and there's Neil Gaiman, I think, was the one who sort of launched this. But there's an effort called Indies First, where authors are going to go to independent bookstores and spend 4 or 5 hours working in the bookstore, recommending books to people as they come in. Not your own books, but just like answering that question for 5 hours to everybody who walks through the door. You should read this. You should read this. So I love to answer that question. I have a lot of favorites in a lot of different genres. The one that is the number one for me always, and I was so honored that he actually gave me a nice blurb for Snowblind, was Stephen King, because I grew up on Stephen King. I often say that Stephen King is the narrative voice of my youth. I just, it's in the back of my head, the cadence, all of that stuff. And I think that he is, by most of the reading public. I think he's massively underrated as an American novelist. Take away all the weird stuff. He won the American Book Award. What was the? Do you know?
He won the O. Henry one time.
The O. Henry, but he also received recently. You would know, Jack. What is the? Whatever it was, there was a big uproar. National, yes. So there was a big uproar because people were like, oh, well, he writes these weird things. But I loved it because I think it was acknowledging his status as an American novelist, never mind what genre he might work in. I love Larry McMurtry. I love Dennis Lehane. Larry McMurtry wrote Lonesome Dove, which won the Pulitzer Prize. Lonesome Dove,
Oh, right.
Larry McMurtry,
Yeah,
which was a television
unbelievable.
thing. Yeah, but that's an amazing novel. Dennis Lehane, who is a Boston novelist, who is, I think, one of the best writers working today. He writes, he used to write sort of straight up crime fiction, but now he writes sort of more literary novels. And The Given Day is amazing by him. And there are many, Joe Lansdale. I could list 1,000 of them, but the other one that comes to mind, and I just started reading a novel called Wayfaring Stranger by James Lee Burke, and I really believe that James Lee Burke is among the finest American novelists working today. I'll in a million years I could never do what he does. And so I read all different kinds of things, but those are just a handful of the authors who I find.
So if you take just two of them that you're favorite about Stephen King, for
Mhm.
example,
Mhm.
what is it that you admire so much about his writing style? What has he got that just grabs you?
I think the thing that they all share, actually, and maybe this is the most telling thing that I could say, is, well, with Joe Lansdale, it's voice. And I've often said, nobody writes like Joe Lansdale. I mean, I could never write like James Lee Burke, but there probably are people who could. Nobody will ever write like Joe Lansdale. Nobody has, nobody ever will. His voice is entirely unique and always will be. It's sort of like James Ellroy. People try to imitate James Ellroy. Even James Ellroy can't write like James Ellroy anymore. But I didn't say that. So with Stephen King, it's definitely character. My two favorite novels of all time are The Stand by Stephen King and A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. Both because of characters, but using The Stand as an example. The Stand is a book written about the end of the world, essentially. 99.7% of the human population is killed off by a government-created, a virus created by the government, and it's accidentally released, and almost everybody in the world is killed. And it's about the people who are left starting to gravitate to try to figure out how to rebuild, and they start having dreams about essentially the light and darkness. One person who represents each, and they sort of gravitate toward those people, and they gather for a final stand against the two groups against one another. But at the end, and I've read that book. I don't usually reread books anymore, but I reread it recently, and I've read that book probably 7 times. And the original version is just shy of 900 pages. The restored version is like 1,200 pages. There's a character whom I won't name in case you read the book, who is a minor character in the book. He's not hugely important, but he warms your heart, and he dies. And hundreds of pages later in the book, at the end, when you see who has survived and hasn't survived, you learn that the people who've survived have named a rock in the center of their town that the kids play around after this guy. And the third time or something like that I read the book, I cried when I got to that point. That's a gift. What a gift, So I always think that if I can make you laugh, but especially if I can make you cry with words on a page, and it's not what I set out to do, ever, but definitely it's happened. I've had many people tell me that a certain thing that I did here or there actually made them cry. You can just go home. You can take the rest of the week off at that point, because, and so it comes all back to that. It all comes back to character. Yes, Lily?
What's your character development process when you develop your characters in your stories?
Again, weirdly, sort of a two-part answer. When I was writing my first novel, the woman who would become my first agent gave me copies, or a Xerox copy of a book that Dean Koontz had written called How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. And it was actually really helpful. It is out of print today and impossible to find because Dean Koontz bought all the copies that existed and destroyed them. But you can occasionally find one in a library or on eBay or Abe Books or something like that. And I found it really helpful. And the most helpful thing in it to me, and this is something that I've actually told people to do many times, is I created for all the main characters in the book a sort of character window, which was sort of not just the arc that I wanted them to follow, but the character's name, including middle name, their birthday, the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to them, the names of their parents, their relatives, where they lived, where they had worked, all of these things, 10% of which or less I actually used. But I found it incredibly helpful to know all of those things. Yes?
Did you make one based on my mom?
No. No. But in any case, it's not based on characters. It's not based on people, but it was just this sort of window of, I probably have done that at some point. But anyway, so that was what I did when I started. Now I don't do that, but I do spend time sort of asking myself why characters are doing what they're doing. Because I feel like if you know the character, the rest is easy. It's sort of like if you know someone well, you can kind of predict how they're going to react to something, right? So when you introduce a situation, a catalyst into your story, if you know your characters, you know how they will respond. So that's I think what's important about that. So that's why I really feel like the characters are way more important than the story, because they're going to drive your story. They're going to direct. Their responses to things will direct what happens next.
Do you ever have dreams about them? Because I feel like if I were writing, I would dream about people.
I don't think I've ever had a dream about characters that I was already working on, but I definitely have had dreams and then written the things that happened in the dreams into books or stories or whatever. In fact, I wrote a novel called Wildwood Road, where the first 4 chapters are essentially an adaptation of a dream that I'd had, and the rest of the book is my sort of explanation of what that dream was all about. Yes, more? Yes, sir.
Who's your favorite character you've ever created?
Do you have an answer you want me to give? You know what? My favorite character that I've ever created is actually Jenna Blake, who is the main character in the Body of Evidence series. Jenna Blake, when she starts off, is a freshman in college at a school that strangely resembles Tufts University, my alma mater. It is what I love about Jenna is that she is. People ask me in interviews what character you've created is most like you, and they're always astonished when I tell them this 18-year-old girl. The ones who know me well are not that surprised, but it's Jenna's obsessed with puzzles. Something happens that is either a mystery or somebody has a problem. She has to solve it. She has to find some way to solve it. And for better or worse, sometimes to my friends' appreciation and sometimes to their fury, I can't keep my nose out of people's business. And in Jenna's case, that's a constructive thing, although it almost gets her killed over and over and over again. But I also think that the way that she deals with people and the way that she approaches the world, my my friend Rick Haudela, who passed away last year, wrote there were 10 books in the series. He wrote the 6th through 10th with me. And when we were working on them, Rick, several of you guys knew him well, but Rick sometimes had a fairly dour disposition. And he said to me several times while we were working on the books, he's like, I don't understand how you can have her be so happy all the time. How could she be so upbeat all the time? And I don't know, I guess that's why I like Jenna, that no matter what the circumstances are, she's going to be in with both feet. So there you go. But you wanted me to say Jesse Murphy from Straight On Till Morning, who is a character who's based on my brother. So. Yeah, that guy's great. That guy's great. Yeah, so sometimes I do write characters who are based on people I know, but it's very rare.
How about the nuns?
The nuns, no. They've never appeared as characters. I did a novel called Straight On Till Morning. And Straight On Till Morning, the first half of the novel is sort of set in our world, and the second half is set in a sort of fantasy world. But all of the main characters in the book, including some of the bad guys, are based on real people. And that's the one time. And I actually went around and I had the people that that book is based on actually sign a piece of the publisher said, listen, you need them to sign off and that they know that you're doing this and that it's okay. And I do still have that file, James, just in case you're wondering. But what was great about that actually was that I had people really recognize some of the characters. And one of our good friends, John Rice, who is in the book as well. Gary was not in that book, but I've named characters after him many times. I think I mentioned him in that one, but I named in The Ocean Dark. There's a character named after Gary. Yeah. But in any case, wait, where was I now? Oh, so our friend John Rice was. He doesn't have a lot of facial expressions. John doesn't, but he was very amused at the presentation of the Jesse Murphy character in Straight On Till Morning, because I think it was pretty dead on. Anyway, not in a bad way, just funny. Other questions? Yes, Ryan.
So you write a lot with people.
I've collaborated many times, yes.
Yeah, so can you just sort of talk about that process? Has it been very different with very different people? Do you prefer to write alone, or do you prefer to write with a collaborator?
What's really interesting to me is that most people assume, I've collaborated over the years with Mike Mignola, with Tim Levin, with Amber Benson, with Jim Moore, with Tom Snagosky, with lots of different people, and with Charlene Harris. Actually, Charlene and I are doing a trilogy of graphic novels called Cemetery Girl together. I should have brought some of those in, but every circumstance is different. Most of them bear a resemblance to what I call sort of literary tennis, where one person will write a scene and then shoot it, or a chapter, and shoot it over to the other person, and that person will sort of revise it and write the next scene or chapter and send it back. And that's usually how it works, although not always. But what's fascinating to me most about collaboration is that people typically think it must be easier because you're writing half as much. It's actually more work to collaborate than it is to write something completely on your own. The other part of the question, the books that I write on my own, with one exception, always mean more to me in the on the heart level than the books that I collaborate on. The books that I collaborate on usually come about because you want to do something fun. I always say that I'm writing as a solitary business, but I'm not a solitary person. So I tend to be talking to a friend and come up with an idea, and then it's, hey, we should do that, and then you go do it. And it is fun to have that sort of give and take, the rapport, the regular contact, and to invent and create something together. But it is also definitely more work. And I keep saying I'm going to do less collaborating. I am doing less collaborating, but I still sort of like media tie-ins. I keep saying I'm not going to do them anymore, and then somebody says, do you want to write a Sons of Anarchy novel? And I'm like, well, yeah. So I don't know if anybody watched the show, Sons of Anarchy? Yeah. So Kurt Sutter, who's the guy who created the show, told Fox that he wanted me to write the book. And Fox picked my publisher because they were my publisher. So when that happens, you can't say no. Not that I would have anyway, but it was, so that was really fun and very cool. Yes?
How does it feel to know that your idol read your book?
Yeah, this, I have to say, this is actually the second time that Stephen King gave me a blurb. And it was really cool because we were in the middle of a blizzard, actually, and he emailed me. He was in Florida at the time and said, I see that you're having quite a storm up there, so it seems like the perfect day for me to start reading your book. Because he was down on the beach, and we were in the middle of a blizzard. But getting those emails was actually cooler than even getting the blurb, just getting the sort of communication saying, I'm doing this. But all of that sort of pales in comparison to when I got the first blurb that I got from him, which came about when I knew he'd gotten the manuscript because his assistant had told me that it was okay for me to send. But I know people ask him all the time, and he gets things all the time, and most of them he ignores or doesn't have time for or whatever. So I had no expectations at all. And the phone rang, and I answered, and he said, if you've ever heard him speak, a voice that is absolutely unmistakable. In his a very heavy Maine accent. He said, "Hey Chris, it's Steve King calling," and I literally thought that someone was playing a joke. I thought it was one of my friends messing with me, and I don't remember what I said, but I think I said something like, "Yeah, uh-huh," and he's like, "No, I'm on my way down to the Red Sox game." And I'm in the middle of reading your book, and that's when I sort of realized that it actually was him, and I fell on the floor. I still had the phone in my hand, but I fell on the floor because I literally was. It was such a weird. And the one thing I can remember saying to him, I don't remember the conversation at all, other than that we talked for 4 or 5 minutes, and at some point in the conversation, I said, in all the years that I've been reading you, I never thought that if I finally talked to you, I'd be talking to you about something I wrote. So I did meet him when I was in college for about 5 minutes, and I've met him since, and I've actually become very good friends with his son, Joe Hill, who's one of the best horror writers out there. He's fantastic and a great guy, who when I met him, I didn't know he was Stephen King's son. I wrote the introduction to his first short story collection without knowing that he was Joe King, writing under a pseudonym. He was sneaky like that. So it isn't as. But at the time when I got that phone call to begin with, it was pretty incredible. It was probably one of the three. The first time I got a blurb that was, I got a blurb from Peter Straub, who was one of my other huge influences and favorite writers when I was growing up. And when I got that was my first sort of important one, and that was amazing. And then I got to work with, and this won't mean anything to anybody here that I don't already know, but growing up I read comics, and I still read comics. My favorite comic ever was a thing called Tomb of Dracula, which was published by Marvel Comics, still their best comic that they've ever done. And it was drawn by a guy named Gene Colan. And I have a friend who could tell you who drew every page of every comic book that was published from like 1955 until probably 1990. And he could tell you every single artist, and I could tell you absolutely zero except Gene Colan. And so I got to do a comic book. The short version of this, believe it or not, is that I got to do a comic book once with Gene Colan, who was a very much an older guy. He's since passed away. At the time I was working with him, he was already in his 70s. When I don't know if many of you are familiar with, I don't know if you're familiar with a character called Blade. There have been 3 movies about Blade, the vampire hunter. Gene Colan was the artist who co-created Blade, and I was working on a Blade one-shot for Marvel Comics. And the editor called me and said, I hope you don't mind, but we're going to get Gene Colan to draw this book. And I was driving down 93 and I almost crashed. I just couldn't believe it. And then the best thing about this story is that Gene Colan, he got, the artists always get art returned to them, but the inker gets some of it and the penciler gets some of it, and he was the penciler. He got 22 pages of the art, and when he got it back, I said, Gene, I got to tell you, it meant so much to me to work with you. I'd love to buy one of those pages from you. And he said, don't worry about it. I loved it. I had a great time working with you. I'll send you something. Don't worry about it. The next day, I got a Federal Express box with 19 of those 22 pages. He just sent them to me. He took the 3 that he liked the best. He sent me the rest. And that was the greatest. That was the best. So I occasionally still have geek out moments, but those are probably the top 3. And then occasionally you meet somebody and you're just like, I don't know. So sometimes it's hard to meet your idols, but sometimes it's awesome. Anybody else? Yes, no? Maybe? All right.
We want to do a signing too.
Yes, if anybody, I have, if you brought books, I'm happy to sign them. I have copies of Snowblind and Father Gaetano's Puppet Catechism, which I can't even say, for sale if you want them, but no pressure. And and I'll sign whatever you have if you want. So thank you.